A music executive died yesterday with a value of $850 million at the ripe age of 94, cozy and comfy in his bed. And every dollar of that $850 million was made off the backs of artists who did not make it to live past 50.
The word that came out of Fort Dix Federal Correctional Institution in New Jersey after Clive Davis died was not grief, not devastated, not broken. People connected to Sean Combs' team used the word wailing.
He was the devil. He's been the devil for 30 years. He's been covered and protected by not only Davis.
And the gap between that word and every softer alternative tells you more about what Davis actually meant to Combs than 30 years of music industry coverage ever managed to convey. Davis was 94 years old when he passed away on June 22, 2026, in his Manhattan home, surrounded by his family, and the music world responded with the kind of tributes reserved for people who genuinely reshaped an entire industry across 6 decades.
I think going to go to the Clive Davis party.
Yes.
It was a surreal event where Whitney's body was still in the hotel, and there was this sort of party where apparently half the room were in tears, the other half were kind of partying.
To have a party in a building where the person whose life he had influenced so enormously and whose life had been affected by her, they were like, I don't understand how that party
Inside a federal prison in New Jersey, the response sounded completely different, and understanding why requires going back to a joint venture agreement made in 1993 that changed both their lives permanently. Davis's legacy in music sits beyond serious dispute. He signed Whitney Houston at 19, launched Alicia Keys, built Arista Records from scratch after Columbia fired him in 1973.
In that 1995 meeting in Beverly Hills, in the home of who was responsible for the murder of Whitney Houston, I said it. His days are numbered. And there were rappers there from all over the country. They were invited to the home, along with members of the CIA, FBI, which they didn't understand why the government was there, including many directors and CEOs of the private prisons throughout the United States.
Earned 4 Grammy Awards and received induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2000. Aretha Franklin called him the greatest record man of all time, which is not a compliment distributed generously in a business full of people who believe they deserve it. None of that changes what his death means specifically for the man counting down to a May 2028 release date inside a federal correctional facility, because the relationship between Davis and Sean Combs reached into territory those industry tributes carefully avoided addressing. Combs was 21 years old and freshly fired from Uptown Records when Davis decided he was worth backing with real money. Most doors in the music industry stayed closed to a young man with no label track record and considerable ambition, and that's when Davis opened one that mattered more than any other. Through Arista Records, Davis structured a 50-50th joint venture with the fledgling Bad Boy Records and backed it with somewhere between $10 and $15 million. Real capital rather than a development deal with escape clauses buried in the fine print. That investment launched the notorious B.I.G., Faith Evans, Maze, and Craig Mack, building an operation that defined the sound of hip-hop through the entire second half of the 1990s. What most industry histories leave out is what developed between Davis and Combs in the years that followed, and why the question of that relationship became one the entire music business agreed not to examine publicly.
Like the fairy tale they told you that Clive Davis, saved Puff after he was thrown out of Uptown Records by Andre.
The federal evidence that accumulated around Sean Combs tells part of what that relationship eventually produced. During raids on his properties, authorities seized more than 1,000 bottles of baby oil and personal lubricant, alongside narcotics, 4 drip equipment, and firearms. Federal indictments described what prosecutors called freak-offs, which the charging documents defined as elaborate, multi-day, drug-fueled, and coerced sexual performances where those seized supplies were used. Several civil lawsuits went further, alleging the baby oil was sometimes laced with date rape drugs including GHB and Rohypnol, used specifically to incapacitate victims before and during those events. None of that evidence materialized from nowhere, and none of it surprised people who had spent years inside the industry watching what the pre-Grammy parties actually functioned as beyond their public-facing purpose.
Demon that he is, to keep the culture in line so the industry could continue to for all of its precious jewels. We have too many laws select.
The civil litigation surrounding those allegations reached more than 30 separate lawsuits detailing claims of sexual assault, sexual exploitation, and drugging at private gatherings, with accusers spanning multiple decades and allegations dating back to the 1990s. A former child actor filed suit in California alleging Combs sexually assaulted him at a Hollywood networking event in 2007, and multiple men and women filed claims describing incidents ranging from forced sexual acts to being drugged at events that served as covers for what prosecutors subsequently documented in federal indictments. The Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office reviewed sexual assault investigations presented by local police to determine whether additional state criminal charges were warranted. Combs's legal team categorically denied all of those claims, describing the civil filings as false and defamatory, and that denial remains the foundation of his defense. Clive Davis's name entered those conversations not through court filings but through anonymous sources and industry reporting that surfaced after Combs's September 2024 arrest. An unnamed source cited by Radar Online claimed Davis had grown deeply troubled by what details of their shared history might reach the public record, with the source describing Davis as not sleeping, haunted by memories of what he and Diddy had done together, and terrified that the truth might come out. Davis denied every element of that allegation through his representatives and maintained he had no inappropriate or criminal connection to Sean Combs. No evidence was publicly presented to contradict that denial. What CNN confirmed in its coverage of Davis's death was that his relationship with Combs had been the subject of scrutiny in his later years, which is the language established outlets use when questions exist, but specific claims remain unproven in any public proceeding. What Davis disclosed on his own terms came in his 2013 memoir, The Soundtrack of My Life, where he confirmed he was bisexual, stating that calling him anything other than bisexual would be inaccurate. He told CNN he had only explored relationships with men after the end of his second marriage, describing the shift as opening himself to a relationship with a person rather than a gender. His long-term partner was real estate agent Greg Schrieffer, with whom Davis shared his life for over 2 decades until his death. That disclosure, made voluntarily when Davis was around 80 years old, sits at the center of what people inside the music industry observed about his dynamic with Combs, and collectively agreed not to discuss for 30 years, because Davis had built a structure of professional influence so complete that questioning what happened inside it carried professional consequences nobody wanted to absorb. Combs absorbed everything that environment taught him and applied it completely. And that's when the methodology Davis used at the top of the music business transferred to a new generation and a new genre running on the same principles. The way private access functions as real currency inside the entertainment industry, the way arrangements never committed to paper underpin the deals that do get signed, the way collective silence gets maintained through shared professional self-interest, all of it became the operational foundation of Bad Boy Records. Every executive who negotiated across from Combs, every journalist who received a particular kind of call from his team, every artist who moved through his orbit was dealing with someone trained at the highest level of that system. What federal prosecutors eventually documented, the freak-offs, the 1,000 bottles of baby oil, the narcotics and recording equipment used to produce blackmail material, represented the endpoint of a methodology that had been running and protected by collective silence for decades before a single federal indictment existed. Davis stayed publicly silent after Combs's arrest. No statement of support, no visible legal intervention, no move of any kind that would tie his name to Combs's during a period of maximum legal exposure. And that silence held through the trial in May 2025. Through the conviction on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution and acquittal on sex trafficking and racketeering charges, and through sentencing in October 2025, when a federal judge delivered 50 months, a $500,000 fine, and 5 years of supervised release. Davis had been present at every significant chapter of Combs's professional life for over 30 years, which meant that silence carried its own weight, regardless of the reasons behind it, and only Davis knew what those reasons actually were. Combs currently serves his sentence at Fort Dix Federal Correctional Institution in New Jersey, transferred from Brooklyn's Metropolitan Detention Center in October 2025 following sentencing, with a Bureau of Prisons release date of May 8, 2028. His legal team filed an appeal challenging both the conviction and the sentence, arguing the Mann Act was applied incorrectly to his case. While at MDC Brooklyn, Combs built an education program called Free Game with Diddy, teaching business and self-development to fellow inmates. His lawyers argued throughout pre-trial detention that conditions at MDC were inhumane, citing maggot-contaminated food, suicide watch checks every 2 hours, and extended stretches without fresh air. Without Davis alive, the calculations that kept certain conversations quiet for 30 years have shifted at every level, and none of that matters in quite the same way it did while Davis was still present, and his denials were still something that could be tested or challenged. Witnesses who stayed silent because Davis's network still carried professional weight can now reassess without the same risk attached to speaking. Journalists who spent years unable to secure sources on the record may find that people who had nothing public to say 6 months ago have reconsidered their position. Federal prosecutors pursuing civil litigation have no reason to move carefully around a man who can no longer respond to what surfaces, and the music industry's collective silence since Combs's arrest has been nearly total in ways that Davis's death now makes permanent. Sean Combs was 21 years old and had nothing when Clive Davis backed him with $15 million and a joint venture agreement that changed the course of hip-hop history. Davis reached 94 years old and died peacefully in Manhattan, survived by his family, his partner, and a legacy Aretha Franklin described more accurately than anyone else managed to. Combs, scheduled for release on May 8, 2028, processes that death from inside a federal correctional facility in New Jersey, and according to people connected to his team, the sound that processing makes travels through prison corridors and gets described not as crying, not as grief in any ordinary sense, but as wailing. That word, chosen deliberately, remains the most precise description available for what it sounds like when the last protective structure between a man and his complete legal exposure finally gives way.